Donald Trump's election victory was driven by domestic issues, but its consequences will reach far beyond U.S. borders. With wars in the Middle East and Europe and tension high with China, how is his victory being received around the world? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. They say all politics is local, and Donald Trump's Make America Great Again slogan reflects how domestic U.S. issues drove his election victory. But his return to office will have major implications for the rest of the world, given the positions of the U.S. as the #1 economic and military power. Since he left office, Israel has waged a relentless war on Gaza and launched attacks on Lebanon, Iran, Syria, Yemen, and other targets in the region. Russia has invaded Ukraine, starting Europe's biggest military conflict since World War II. Tensions between the U.S. and China have increased, while a shadow of economic uncertainty has descended on many parts of the world. So, how is Trump's win being seen around the globe? In Gaza, there was little celebration, with people there saying there was no difference between Kamala Harris and Trump.
He and Kamala Harris is the same as administration. Their enemy and hostility against the Palestinian people and against the Palestinian issue is fixed, will not change.
I expect the next stage for the Palestinian people to be very difficult, despite the destruction, death and displacement that we witnessed last year. However, what is coming will be more difficult. It will be politically devastating.
World political figures gave the customary congratulations, even if for some it was maybe through gritted teeth. Not so for Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
I say a brilliant victory, perhaps the biggest comeback and giant struggle in Western political history. They threatened him with jail, they took his property, they wanted to kill him. The entire American media turned against him, and he still won.
Trump says he wants to end wars, including the one in Ukraine, where his win is being met with unease. U.S. support is vital for the fight against Russia. In office, he was severely critical of NATO, saying the U.S. was paying too much and other members too little. And there was even speculation he might withdraw from the alliance. Congratulating Trump on his election win, the foreign minister of Germany, which has strongly backed Ukraine, indicated that a new security relationship may be needed.
For me, for us, it is clear that we Europeans will now have to take on even more security policy responsibility. Today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. For ourselves, for our children. We are prepared for this.
Russia says ties with the U.S. are at an all-time low, but Moscow is open to dialogue with Trump. Since he left office 4 years ago, U.S. relations with Russia have plunged to lows not seen since the Cold War. The Kremlin says it hopes for an improvement.
It's almost impossible to worsen US-Russia ties further. The relationship is at its lowest point historically. It will now depend on the next leader of the United States. President Putin has repeatedly said that he is open to constructive dialogue based on justice and equality and a willingness to take into account each other's concerns.
In Beijing, there was mixed reaction to Trump's victory.
I think it's too bad. I mean, even when Biden was in charge, US-China relations weren't very good. The difference is Trump is an open book, while the other, Biden, isn't.
Trump is not particularly surprising. He does what he says. But then we have to pay more attention to the impact of Trump's election on our country's trade. And now that Trump is indeed elected, there will be good and bad in our trade relations.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. In Berlin is Stephen Erlanger, the chief diplomatic correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. In Oxford, Dimitar Bechev, senior fellow at Carnegie Europe. And in Boston, Rami, Khouri, distinguished public policy fellow at American University of Beirut. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Stephen, let me start with you today, and let's start by talking about what impact all this might have on the Middle East. What will a Trump presidency, from your vantage point, look like when it comes to the issues that are playing out in the Mideast? How consequential will this be for this region at a time of such tension?
It's a very good question. I'm not sure, of course, we know the answer. We do know that Benjamin Netanyahu wanted Trump to win. We do know that at different points during the campaign, Trump said to Israel, better hurry up and get it done because you're hurting yourself. At other points, he's sort of said, do what you have to do. But it's not clear ever what Trump's actually talking about. It's the same with Ukraine. So Netanyahu will feel emboldened, empowered. I mean, I think the likelihood of American military aid now being restricted to Israel seems far away. But Trump doesn't take office for a couple months, so the Biden administration still has a bit of leverage. But since it's had so little leverage on Mr. Netanyahu so far, it's hard to imagine that it's going to be much, much different. The big question to me is Iran, because Trump has Iran in his sights, and Netanyahu has Iran in his sights. And it does raise the question of whether Trump would be more flexible, put it that way, in letting Netanyahu deal militarily with Iran or even helping him to do that. So I think these are some of the big questions. And then, of course, is the Abraham Accords, relationships with the Saudis. It is possible, I suppose, if one wants to be optimistic, that Trump will want to get the Gaza war over with and something sustainable put in its place.
Rami, as you heard there from Stephen, it's no secret that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been hoping for a Trump victory, and the Israeli Prime Minister was one of the first leaders to congratulate Trump on this victory. What can we read into that? From your perspective, what kind of impact do you think this is going to have when it comes to Israel's wars on Gaza and the conflict in Lebanon?
You know, I think we should not put too much emphasis on the change in leadership that's coming. I've been following the American elections and U.S.-Middle East relations since I was in college in the U.S. in 1966, so just before the 67 war. And I can tell you that looking back from here, from the Middle East, and certainly from the vantage of all of the leaders in this region, the consistent record is that the United States government, broadly with the approval of its people, gives Israel almost everything it wants, only occasionally applies a little gentle pressure here and there. But basically, the presidency is not the major factor in American foreign policy. Electoral politics is, and we just saw this with the outrageous behavior of Kamala Harris in refusing to say anything on Gaza other than the talking points that she got. And this is the consequences is that she lost. So I don't see huge changes, but certainly erratic behavior by Trump, dramatic behavior, let's call it. He's interested in two things. He's interested in drama and entertainment, which is his background, and he's interested in making deals politically to benefit him and deals financially to benefit his family and friends. So I would anticipate more of the same that we saw last time. The problem, though, is that one of the reasons that the October 7 attack happened, and the U.S. is involved now in fighting in Iraq and Yemen and Lebanon, all over the place, is that the Abraham Accords that are so widely lauded in the West were seen as a catastrophe in the Middle East to try to resolve the regional tensions without addressing the core problem in Israel-Palestine. And that was Trump's doing. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who really knew nothing about the Middle East and showed it. So the explosion of the wars recently reflect back on what Trump did when he was in the White House. So I think hopefully he'll learn his lessons and try to go. It's good that he might go for a big deal, and I wouldn't rule out the grand bargain idea with Iran, Palestine, Israel, Saudi Arabia, nuclear stuff, security guarantees. I wouldn't rule that out, but it has to satisfy the needs of all the key players, which he has never done.
Rami, let me ask you about something else that Stephen alluded to, which is the fact that Trump has indicated over the course of the last several months that he'd like to see an end to the war in Gaza. But even if that were to bear out, should it be expected, from your perspective, should it be expected that Trump would most likely accept some kind of an outcome that was heavily weighted in Israel's favor, including perhaps Israeli military control ultimately over the Gaza Strip?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, when he tells Israel, get it over with, he says, just go do anything you have to kill them, destroy the place, trash all of Gaza, send it underwater. He doesn't care. At one point, his son-in-law wanted to talk about the potential for casinos on the beach. If that potential is not there, there's no gain for Trump and his family, then he doesn't really care. He doesn't know Gaza from the moon. So yes, he'll go along with anything Israel wants if it benefits him. And the difficulty here is that his core constituency, a core constituency for Trump, is the evangelical American Christians, who are wildly pro-Israeli, wildly ignorant of the realities in the region, and wildly uncaring about what happens as long as they can fulfill their biblical prophecies. And I think Trump is telling Israel, do whatever you want, just get this off the news pages, because he understands that that's what triggered the protests in the U.S., brought down Kamala Harris, and created new tensions.
Stephen, if I could shift gears for a moment or two and talk about NATO, because NATO Chief Mark Rutte congratulated Donald Trump. He said his leadership will again be key to keeping our alliance strong. Can that really be the sentiment currently at NATO? Because Trump's first term was very fraught for the alliance. In those years, Trump lambasted European allies such as Germany for weak defense spending, and he reportedly even mulled pulling Washington out of NATO. So how is NATO really feeling right now?
Well, one of the reasons Mark Rutte was chosen was because he gets on with Trump. People were thinking about Trump possibly winning. NATO, you know, there's a new law in America, so it's very hard for the United States to pull out of NATO without a two-thirds vote of the Senate. But Trump can undermine NATO simply by saying, you know, those aggressive Montenegrins, which he's once called them, I'm not going to fight for them. Or by saying, as he's also done in the past, those who don't pay enough, don't pay their dues, as he likes to think of it, I'm not going to protect them. At the same time, it is worth saying that more countries have been paying 2% of GDP, including the countries most vulnerable to Russia, Poland, the Baltic states, etc. They've all been paying considerably more than 2%. So Trump shouldn't have to be complaining about them. But he doesn't like multilateral alliances. He thinks they weaken the United States rather than strengthen them. And he does kind of think of Article 5 as a kind of protection racket. I mean, that you have to pay in to get protection. And this is a long-time obsession of his. So it's going to be a rocky road. I don't think he's going to pull out of NATO. I think he just wants to take credit for NATO members, particularly European members, spending, as they should do, much more money on defense. If the Ukraine war, if Russia is a serious security threat to Europe, which I believe it is, then Europe must be paying more. It's ridiculous to think that there's a major threat and you're not going to spend more than the cost of a couple cups of coffee a day per person. So, I mean, this issue will roil us for some time, but I don't believe in Armageddon.
Dimitar, I noticed something you posted on X earlier, since we're talking about Europe. You said on X that Europe's relationship with Trump's U.S. would be reminiscent of EU-Turkey dynamics. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, both EU and Turkey are in NATO. Most member states are NATO member states too, especially after Sweden and Finland joined. But the same with the US and Turkey, right? But if you look at the European-Turkish relationship, it's filled with complexity. There is a lot of tension, to be sure, but there is also economic interdependence and overlapping interests, not least in the area of migration management. And there's a lot of rhetoric around it. So I think something similar might happen between Trump and the Europeans. I mean, there'll be, of course, the rhetorical missives every now and then, but they'll be getting down to business and trying to work out deals. There's a China dimension, of course, to be sure, where actually Europe, if you look at the long haul, has moved closer to the US position. And I'm sure there might be some give and take where the Europeans will be taking a much closer position to the US with the whole de-risking business.
Dimitar, let me ask you about Ukraine, because before the election, Trump had claimed that he would be able to broker a deal to end the war in Ukraine even before he takes office. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, after Trump's victory, congratulated Trump, saying, "I appreciate President Trump's commitment to the peace through strength approach in global affairs." But what is Zelenskyy really feeling right now? How concerned is he about what all this means for Ukraine going forward?
Well, I think he's very concerned, and he has a history with Trump, to be sure. I'm not 100% certain that Trump knows what the deal might be, except for sitting down with Putin at some point. Maybe it's something along the lines of freezing the conflict, but either way, Ukrainians will be trying to say, we have to support us, and we're willing to go extra mile bilaterally in building up the relationship, buying kit from you, playing alongside. And that's the same line that you hear in Warsaw, in the Baltic countries, and a number of other places in Eastern Europe. Going back to what Stephen said about the multilateralism, there'll be a hub-and-spoke dynamic where lots of governments in this part of Europe will be trying to build a special relationship with the Trump White House, be it because of purchase of high-end American military kits, F-35 in the Czech Republic, in Romania, in Poland, for instance. Now the US is a main supplier of liquefied natural gas after Russia's full-scale invasion. So there's a lot of leverage points that people, political elites, governments will be bringing to the table when they talk to Trump and try to ingratiate themselves with this administration.
Stephen, I saw you reacting to what Dimitar was saying there. I'll let you jump in, but I also want to ask you about something else Zelenskyy mentioned in that statement. He added, "We look forward to an era of a strong United States of America under President Trump's decisive leadership. We rely on continued strong bipartisan support for Ukraine in the United States." Can Zelenskyy actually rely on continued strong bipartisan support, as he implies in that statement?
I'm sure he's very nervous. But there are people around Trump, like Lindsey Graham, who have been pushing him very hard to understand that what Trump does on Ukraine will affect how the rest of the world sees him. If Trump makes Ukraine abandon its country, this will be seen as a failure of American policy, which will have impact, Lindsey Graham argues, on how Xi Jinping looks at Taiwan. So it will be shaped as Trump's legacy, because that's what works with Trump. And don't forget, Trump, in his first term, he brought more tanks and troops to Europe. Obama had taken them out. After 2014, Trump put them back in. Trump was the one who agreed to sell Ukraine offensive anti-tank weapons, which Obama had been reluctant to do. So Trump is a little hard to gauge here. I think I can imagine him saying to Putin, look, you've got 80% of Ukraine is not occupied. Just let's stop where we are. And if you don't, I'm going to let the Ukrainians shoot whatever they want, and I'm going to help them do it. And say to Zelenskyy, look, you know, the killing has to stop. You need serious talks with Putin. We can talk about what happens to the rest of your country down the road, but now it's time for a serious talk. No one's ever tried that. Now, I don't know what makes Putin talk seriously, but Trump might be able to do it if he's willing, as he has been often in the past, to go along with the Putin narrative on Ukraine, that it's a difficult country, it's a corrupt country, it's not a real country, and it should be neutral. So, I mean, this is one of the big questions that we don't know. If I were Zelenskyy, I'd be very nervous, but I wouldn't assume things are going to collapse right away. There are a lot of people around Trump who see it as a very important part of Trump's own legacy in his next term.
Rami, I want to refocus for a minute or two on the Middle East. Earlier in the show, we brought up Iran and the role that Iran is going to play in all this going forward. Iran's government, in response to Trump being elected, said the election of the president of the United States doesn't have a direct impact on us. In any case, the general policies of the U.S. and the Islamic Republic are fixed, and this matter won't undergo significant changes with different individuals. But considering how tense things are in the region, what would leadership in Iran really be worried about or thinking about right now?
They would be certainly looking at larger conflicts directly with Israel or with the United States and Israel together fighting Iran. The U.S. mainly in a defensive role, supporting Israel, the Israelis offensively attacking Iran, as they've been doing for about 15, 20 years. The main thing that Iran wants is to stop being used as the boogeyman and the great evil that American political elites make it to be. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, it doesn't matter who it is in the U.S. They all see Iran as the big troublemaker with its, proxies, as they call them, and its tentacles, Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever. It used to be the Soviet Union. China is lining up to be given that role. Iran wants to get out of this situation and be respected and treated decently. They're not asking for any privileges. They just want to stop being sanctioned and attacked and threatened and surrounded by 40 military bases of the U.S. Only because of allegations by American politicians who half the time don't really know what they're talking about, but respond to talking points from the lobbies that work on them and their evangelical base. That's what they want. They're not out to conquer the Middle East. They just don't want to be abused, as has been the case. The Obama agreement on the nuclear and sanctions deal was an extraordinary example of what happens when you actually engage Iran or anybody. You talk to them, you negotiate, you work out a deal that satisfies both sides and responds to international law. I think that's what essentially they'd like. They just haven't had the sophistication in a way or the subtlety to push that process. The new Iranian president has talked about modifying the policy or modifying the relationship with the U.S. and the West to get back to a give and take. And let's hope that happens. I still believe that a grand bargain idea of addressing links with Iran, the Arab-Israeli conflict, Palestinian statehood, Lebanese security, Saudi needs, etc. All of these can probably be wrapped into an agreement that is reasonable and satisfies everybody's needs and reduces everybody's fears. It's a big challenge, way beyond the technical and political and personality capabilities of American diplomats, I fear, for the most part. A few of them are able, like Bill Burns and others who can do this, but most American diplomats over the years have not been able to do this because they're afraid of challenging the Israeli position.
Dimitar, I know we're jumping around a little bit here, but we just have a lot to cover geopolitically. Let me ask you specifically about the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. He didn't hold back. He called Trump's victory brilliant. How happy must Orban be right now? Would he be thinking that this Trump victory bodes well for his strongman style of politics going forward?
Well, absolutely. I mean, he has built a very strong personal relationship. And if you remember, he was the only foreign leader whose name was mentioned in the debate between Harris and Trump. He has become a cult figure amongst the Trump wing of the Republican Party. And he has developed a brand of politics that appeals to American conservatives. The whole anti-woke movement is very much inspired by Hungary, which is ironic because historically Hungary is a country that is introspective, a language few people understand, even in Central Europe. And now you have a figure who is punching beyond his own weight and his country's weights. There might be problems down the line because Hungary is one of the countries that is very close to China. I mean, people discuss Putin and Orban's dynamic, but when Xi Jinping came to Europe, he paid visit to Paris and then to Budapest and Belgrade. Chinese companies look at Hungary as a potential backdoor. If you look at investment into electric vehicles, battery making. So it will be difficult, or maybe tricky, maybe not impossible for Orban to square the circle and keep this privileged position he has in Trump world, and at the same time continue business as usual with the Chinese. Maybe Russia will be less of a challenge, but China will definitely pose questions.
Stephen, Dimitar there was talking about China. You mentioned it earlier as well. And I want to just talk about that. We don't have a whole lot of time left. But we know that China has said, since it was announced that Trump won, that it hoped for peaceful coexistence with the United States. But when it comes to China, Trump has threatened to expand tariffs up to 200% on Chinese-made goods. That's far beyond the Biden administration's existing tariffs. What is China thinking about Trump's win, and does China believe that Trump will actually do that when it comes to the tariffs?
Well, China, I think, is happy to have a president who, as John Bolton says, his mind's like a pinball machine. Trump goes from topic to topic. Now, tariffs are an obsession with Trump for the last 50 years. He believes tariffs are wonderful, despite the fact that they raise prices for the people who actually buy the goods, who are Americans. But I think, again, this is a big bargaining chip. Trump throws around all kinds of numbers. He does believe that the balance of trade should improve. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. He thinks by making Chinese goods, Chinese cars much more expensive. So in a sense, Trump is kind of a protectionist. China doesn't like that. Its economy is already slowing down. On Taiwan, I don't know. I mean, my sense is Trump is less obsessed with Taiwan than many people in his own party, people like Elbridge Colby. So we'll have to see. But right now, I think Trump sees China. He admires Xi Jinping and his control of the population, but sees China as a big economic competitor that he wants to bring down a little bit in terms of size.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Stephen Erlanger, Dimitar Bechev, and Rami Khouri. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here. Bye for now.